It is day 12 for a crew of volunteers living inside NASA's virtual Mars station. The 3D printed 1,700-foot habitat will simulate the environment and missions expected to take place on the red planet, known as Mars analogs. Many scientists use them for research. To get a better understanding of these stations, we wanted to bring in an expert who has been to one, and we have U.S. space historian Jordan Bimm from the University of Chicago here. Jordan, good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, Chris. Great to be here.
So you were just at the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah. Explain to folks kind of big picture here what these stations are and what the goal is.
Right. So these are places on Earth that are seen as similar in certain ways to predicted aspects of Mars exploration in the future. And they're becoming more and more prevalent these days. People have seen NASA's recent one-year mission that you just mentioned. That has just begun. That's happening in Houston indoors. And people may have seen this recent reality TV show on Fox called Stars on Mars, which is being shot in Australia. But the station I went to is one of the oldest, founded in the year 2000 by the Mars Society. Back in 2000, they founded this station in Utah and a twin station in the Canadian Arctic on Devon Island. So they are the ones who have had the most experience with these sort of simulated Mars analog missions.
So you've been inside them. How do you explain, say at a cocktail party or in an elevator when somebody says, hey, what was that like? How do you explain it to make us all understand what it's like?
Well, it's physically grueling to be out there in the desert. And we were doing field biology, so we were going out of the HAB unit, which is this large cylindrical space station looking like structure, into the desert twice a day. So it was very physically grueling. So you're facing the environmental challenges. Obviously, a desert with the heat is not the same as Mars because Mars is very cold, but you're still dealing with an environmental stressor. And then inside the HAB, you're dealing with some social stressors, right? So like lack of privacy, eating the freeze-dried food that you can see there as well. So you're trying to manage both of those things. So it is very difficult, but in the case of my mission, I was with a really wonderful crew, an Arctic botanist named Paul Sokolov from the Canadian Museum of Nature, and an entomologist named Jacopo Rizzotti from Rockefeller University in New York, and we got along really well. So it was, for me, a lot of fun and a very interesting experience.
How long were you in there for?
8 days.
Wow.
And I was there last summer as well for another 8-day mission. So this is my second time there.
And you guys focused on Martian biology. You're working on a project called Mars in a Jar. Tell us about this research. What's the goal here? Great name, by the way.
Thanks. So I'm a historian of astrobiology, which is the field concerned with searching for life beyond the Earth. And we haven't found any life beyond the Earth, but scientists simulate it and they study it. So the Mars in the Jar refers to these very early experiments where scientists would create the conditions on Mars inside a tiny jar in a laboratory and put Earth life inside to see if it could survive, almost like a Martian terrarium. But instead of just being in the archives like most historians do, I wanted to go into the field and see what was happening today, not with simulations inside a jar, but human-scaled simulations in a desert. So that's why I want to go with these biologists, go into this Mars-like environment in the southeastern part of Utah and look at how they were looking at Earth life, microbes, lichens, plants, and insects, as if they were extraterrestrial biology. And this is going to help enrich my historical project.
I think about people who may have been, a generation or two before you. They were limited to a jar. You now are able to kind of experience it in a much more dynamic way by replicating the environment out there in Utah or other folks up in Canada. How far out would you imagine your kids or your grandkids? When might we be able to get to Mars?
I mean, that's the big question. This is the question that everyone talks about when we go to these analog sites. We have these fascinating discussions amongst ourselves about the future of space science and exploration. But if you're asking me right now, I think there is a chance that humans will go to Mars in the next 20 or 30 years. The big question, of course, is who will send them and why will they be going? Will it be NASA as part of the Artemis program to the moon and onto Mars? Will it be SpaceX, probably the ones making the boldest and biggest claims about sending humans to Mars for commercial settlement? Or will it be a partnership of these? Or maybe the Chinese National Space Agency will get there first, or perhaps it will be for a totally unforeseen purpose, like maybe extreme adventure tourism, like we saw with the case of the Ocean Gate Titan, and that's still fresh in everyone's mind. So those questions are still open, and what these analog sites accomplish, in my view, is they advocate for a specific type of Mars exploration. So at the Mars Desert Research Station, they advocate for humans to Mars for science, and that's a very specific goal that isn't just preordained. That needs to be advocated for constantly. And these simulated missions make the case for humans to Mars for science instead of robots to Mars or humans to Mars for commercial settlement.
And that would be your argument that if all, I mean, for those of us who don't have a vested interest per se in who gets there first, whether it's public or private, U.S. or China, is there an objective answer to, like, what's the right order of operations? Should it be private? Should it be public? Should it be the U.S.? How do you sort out right from wrong, if that's the right way to frame the question even?
Yeah, I think it's a cultural answer that's constantly changing, and there's no right answer. It just depends on what we want to do with Mars. What is the point of Mars? What is our use of it? Right now, of course, we are using Mars for science. We have a number of robotic rovers and a drone helicopter operating there, but it doesn't mean that Mars will always be for science. If SpaceX makes it there first, they're going to turn Mars into a place for commercial settlement. And sending 1 million humans to Mars for a city like Elon Musk wants to do would compromise elements of the scientific integrity of Mars. So these goals are in conflict. And this is what I teach my students in my class, Explorations of Mars, here at UChicago. And what I hope that these simulated missions and my participation in them furnish this sort of teaching. Because I really want to be teaching that next generation of space scientists, engineers, visionaries, and astronauts, perhaps.
Well, thanks for spending some time teaching us this morning. We really appreciate it. Jordan Bimm, space historian at University of Chicago. Enlightening conversation. We appreciate you having it with us here on the stream.
Thanks, Chris.